This show, like all shows on Blogging Heads TV and Mini of Life TV, is produced by the Non-Zero Foundation. Please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/nonzerofoundation. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kat Rosenfield.
And I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and we are Feminine Chaos on Blogging Heads. And I would like to discuss this for a moment. This is in honor of the late, great Jerry Stiller, who played Frank Costanza very memorably on Seinfeld, and who really just about a year or so before his death became a sort of fashion icon with a plaid blazer. And there are no opportunities to wear a blazer of any kind in this world. So it's a little warm in my apartment to do so, but just in honor of Stiller. Yes, of Jerry Stiller. And I'm going to just recommend that everybody watch the clip where Frank Costanza it's a Seinfeld clip that you can just watch online, where the Costanzas meet the Rosses for dinner at the Rosses' place, and Frank Costanza tries to contemplate if there's a hen, a rooster, and a chicken, and the rooster and the chicken are together, he asks about who the hen's partner is, and sex
with the hen.
Exactly, and he. In doing so, like I rewatched this a few times yesterday, and he does like a hand motion about the hen that's almost like a sort of hourglass, like the hen. And he's wearing a blazer like this. So in that scene, and in general, but especially in that scene. So
well, it's a lovely homage.
I wanted to begin with an homage.
I am wearing a healing case of poison ivy all over my face, which I'm told is not super visible on camera.
I don't see it, so yeah. I think you're all right.
But yeah, so, both of us have excitement in our lives. I went out weeding in my new garden, pulled up something that I thought was not evil, and then went like that, and have been sporting the rash that goes with it, the accessory rash, for the past week and a half. So this is the best it's looked.
At least it's trending in that direction.
Right. Yes, yeah. It's true. I mean, it could have been worse. Although the fun thing about poison ivy is that when you get it where you first touched, but then your body will just kind of spontaneously erupt with little other spots afterward.
For how long afterward?
Here and there. Apparently up to a month.
Ooh.
I am so itchy. I'm so itchy. Not, fortunately not above the neck, but yeah, going to try not to scratch during this podcast. And fortunately, we've got some good diversionary topics, including a controversy that seized hold of the internet. Is that where we're starting?
I think that's where we're starting.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's, oh my goodness.
Okay. So first things first, who is Alison Roman?
Alison Roman invented the chickpea. Okay, there were no chickpeas. And then this woman named Alison Roman was like,
gave
you know
birth
what?
to a chickpea.
She did.
She had sex with the hen, and she gave birth.
Oh my God.
She gave birth to a chickpea. That's where they come from, right? Yeah. Okay.
Of course. That's right. I mean, we're just being scientifically accurate here. Botanistically accurate. Yeah. So Alison Roman is a food writer and also a kind of Instagram influencer, as these things tend to be these days, where everybody who is famous is also an Instagram influencer. Mm-hmm. She has a food column in the New York Times, and she has written 2, I believe, cookbooks, the more recent one called Nothing Fancy. And her thing, as it were, is this sort of, she's like the cool girl food writer, if that makes sense. If Gia Tolentino were, and this will come up as relevant, white and a food writer rather than a culture writer, you would get somebody like Alison Roman. She's, I guess, 34, so which is, not.
Is she? I thought she was in her late 20s.
I think she's 34.
Oh.
But she's certainly gotten famous while fairly young, because, she's only ever been younger than 34. Pretty sure I saw 35.
Yeah, you're right.
Huh.
I'm wrong.
Well, I win that very important debate and give myself a little reward.
I'm big enough when I can admit my mistakes. Do you accept my apology? This is very important when
only if others are going to have to accept it first.
Right.
I'm not really in a position to accept or reject that apology.
Right. People with less privilege than myself have to determine if my apology. So not to get ahead of ourselves.
Okay. So basically Alison Roman, very
influencer.
Sort of successful in a very sort of like cool girl, Glossier sort of aesthetic. She's done an Into the Gloss Top Shelf, and her photographs, like her food styling looks very much like from, I guess it's supposed to be like Kinfolk or that type of like very hipster chic kind of aesthetic, right? Anyway, she became famous from a recipe that went viral before viral was a bad thing, called The Stew, #The Stew, which I have made and been disappointed by a couple times, unfortunately. It's chickpeas, coconut milk, and a lot of turmeric and some ginger, and just kind of tastes whatever. She made this recipe, and I guess at the time it caused a little bit of controversy on kind of food writer Twitter, that it was like basically she was this white lady claiming to have invented curry or something,
although she didn't actually claim to have invented curry.
No. I'm saying what the controversy was. Right. I think I have a sort of side note theory, which is that I think by calling it the stew rather than a curry, I feel like she was probably trying to preempt these sorts of accusations, but that she might have been better off just strategically calling it curry, and that this may have been part of where it all went wrong. But then, so that's the kind of long story backstory.
I love the idea that there's a scenario in which this could have gone right. I've already concluded that there was just no winning for her.
Certainly at a certain point that was true. And yeah, that may have been true all along. So she did an interview had you ever heard of New Consumer?
I had not, but now everybody has.
So it reminds me a little bit of like the babe.net, not to bring things back for the millionth time to our good friend Aziz Ansari, but like suddenly this publication.
God, I hope he's okay. But yes, so New Consumer, she did this interview.
If nothing else, he would never be accused of the specific crimes that Alison Roman has been accused of where chickpea curry is concerned.
That's true.
Nor would she likely be accused of the ones he was. Anyway, so in this New Consumer interview, she came across as just very like sort of candid, like DGAF cool girl in general, like with kind of a swagger that's like her style, but it was sort of a little bit,
you were talking about,
New Consumer. She gives this publication we've never heard of. Alison Roman gives an interview where she talks about selling out or not, especially during the pandemic when everybody, Alison Roman included, apparently, is in a precarious financial situation. So she talks about how she is doing some kind of like cookware, like extra curated special cookware collaborations, limited edition.
Unlike,
and this
was the key.
Those bitches is how she, like, I'm not putting a word in her mouth. This is how she speaks about them.
Did she actually call them bitches?
Oh, okay. So I have
She said, bitch, you sold out immediately, right?
Right. She says, she uses bitch. Okay. Right. This is not coming from...
So, I'm just gonna...
She says, so I have the Alison Roman quote. She writes, like the idea that when Marie Kondo decided to capitalize on her fame and make stuff that you can buy, that is completely antithetical to everything she's ever taught you. I'm like, damn, bitch, you fucking sold out immediately. And then it goes on, for the low, low price of $19.99, please to buy my cutting board. Like, no. Okay. So that's where things kind of went all over the place. Also, though, and perhaps more consequentially for her, is it Teigen or Teigen? Teigen. Thank you. She complained about Chrissy Teigen having, I want to say farmed content. Or a content farm.
Right, that she's running this sort of lifestyle,
yes.
vertical where she's, producing stuff, and she's doing a line for Target. So and Chrissy Teigen, just for the uninitiated possibly.
And I might be a little uninitiated. I wasn't entirely sure.
So she is a former model. She was for a time one of either the top paid or one of the top paid models in the world. She was in Sports Illustrated, big deal, and is now married to John Legend and has become sort of, there's almost like a cult of personality around her. Like, she's just so cool. And she's had all these different gigs. Like, she emceed the lip syncing competition show, that was a thing for a little while. And she's managed to parlay her, her fame as a model into just this sort of empire almost. She's worth about $12 million, and she has about 12 million Twitter followers. So that's who Chrissy Teigen is.
And also, so she's almost like, in some ways, a more successful and extreme version of Alison Roman, in that both of them kind of are attractive women whose thing is coolness and relatability. That's kind of it, just in different ways. No, I think so, in different ways.
I don't know. I've got to push back on the idea that the swimsuit model.
I'm not saying she is relatable. I'm saying that I think that that's what she's trying to project. I think
ultimately it became that way, but I do think she and Alison Roman, I'm like Alison, oh, I got a first name basis with her. Chrissy Teigen would never do Into the Gloss top shelf interview because she's too famous for it.
Oh, there are people that famous who do it all the time. I think I almost think she wouldn't do it because she's too famous in a sort of she's not quite as, it's almost about snobbishness almost, where Alison Roman is more sort of limited edition appeal in a way. I guess.
I really do think that Alison Roman and Chrissy Teigen are just not comparable in a lot of ways.
Well, they're certainly as a matter of scale, of fame, they're not comparable.
Right. Chrissy Teigen was in a Super Bowl commercial. She's a spokesmodel for a car brand, which I can't remember, but it's something luxury. She's a big deal. She lives in a huge mansion. She's incredibly wealthy. She's married to a celebrity.
Right. And Alison Roman, as comes across in all of her interviews, lives in, I guess, a small apartment in Brooklyn in a walk-up that does not have a dishwasher. So she's a food writer who's quite famous, but she's also, she's not an A-list celebrity gazillionaire.
Yeah. I don't think that they necessarily belong in the same category.
Oh, no, I don't think they do either. What I'm saying is that I think their concepts, in a way, are not that far off, and the reason I bring this up is because it turned out, and this is where things all got kind of interesting, that I guess Chrissy Teigen had been an executive producer for some forthcoming television show that Alison Roman was making, perhaps because of this affinity of sort of brand. But then it was wait a second, it seems a bit like one of these sort of, it seemed a bit like bridge burning, right? It was
it was
a professional faux pas.
Candid to the point of shooting yourself in the foot.
Right.
Exactly. I'm laughing because my husband just crawled on the floor past.
Did he actually do it?
He did to avoid being seen on camera. So The upshot of this,
I'm distracted by the image.
it was distracting in person too.
I bet.
So the upshot of this was, and this was fascinating the way that it unfolded. That at first people were like, certain writers on Twitter were being critical of this interview, and people were like, well, isn't that girl on girl crime to be critical of Alison Roman in this interview? And then people started noticing that Roman had been critical of Chrissy Teigen, which is an even more unforgivable sin, and the pendulum swung wildly and permanently in the other direction. And eventually, as always the case with these things, a racial dynamic was injected into it. So it became about how Alison Roman had punched down in this interview at Chrissy Teigen, who is half Thai, half Norwegian, born in Utah, but has tanner skin, certainly, than Alison Roman does.
Yes. Although perhaps not more so than Marie Kondo. However, Marie Kondo is Japanese and is therefore nobody had thought Marie Kondo was white, whereas I guess people had thought Chrissy Teigen was, because these things are all a little bit ambiguous, which gets to this weird side thing. So I wrote about this controversy for Arc Digital, but what I didn't get to mention, just because it didn't really fit with like the topic, sort of the angle I had taken, was Claire Willett. Wait, sorry, I have this tab open because I want to remember what her. Okay, I think a British writer, Claire Willett, had some whole long. Or maybe just a Twitter personality, I'm not really sure. But anyway, she had some whole thread, like a really like massive thread about this whole controversy where she was going full on sort of like white lady guilt angle.
Oh yeah. And she said that Alison Roman had pulled back the lid on how white women talk about women of color behind their backs.
Right.
Like, that she suddenly this was no longer about a very specific beef between a sort of a quasi lifestyle celebrity and a much larger actual celebrity. Now it was we white women, you white women, because of course,
she's the exception, of course.
She's exempt. You're all complicit. In this. Yeah.
Well, so there was one part of this thread that I was just obsessed with and still am, like 3 days later. Okay, so she wrote, is Isaac Mizrahi a sellout because he has a department store line? Now that's just a part of one of the, I'm not going to sit down and read like all, volume upon volume of this woman's thread here. Isaac Mizrahi, I thought so, and I looked up to confirm, he's of Syrian Jewish background. Now, the question is he white, but Chrissy Teigen isn't? And I would say this is a bit of a like nebulous thing. And to draw such a like absolute line there, like that Isaac Mizrahi is like swimming in white privilege that is unavailable to woman of color Chrissy Teigen, seems like a stretch there. I think there are there are peripheries of identity and so forth, and that I think these things are, sort of subjective. And the idea that Isaac Mizrahi, I know it's obvious to me what he looks like. I guess not everybody does. He looks not like the whitest person ever, but I guess whatever. The point is, it just seems like a little, it just was a strange example, I thought. And it also just seemed like this weird thing where the narrative, like you're saying, it became this sort of predetermined thing, about where it couldn't be that Alison Roman was being rude just because she was being rude. But I'm going to be woke baby here and say that I do think that the interview, that she did say something a bit racist in that interview.
What, the please too?
Yes, and I'm going to explain why. So that's what I explain why because at first I wasn't sure what to make of it, because it seemed a little bit like she was being very rude to Marie Kondo, but also Marie Kondo is probably doing just fine and not worried about it. And I don't feel like it's my job to educate you. No, I don't feel like it is my job to defend Marie Kondo or any other famous person from the possibility of having their feelings hurt online. But I think, so the please to was apparently, as Alison Roman later explained on Twitter, it's an Eastern European accent and an inside joke and a reference to some cookbook, and it was not meant to be Marie Kondo's accent specifically. Fine. I think in context, though, if you actually look at what she was saying about Marie Kondo, about the
cutting board,
the whole thing about crassness, and sort of shilling stuff for profit and the greed of it. It did seem a little bit, I don't know how much is about race and how much is about class and how much you can even disentangle these in this particular context, but kind of like this crass peddler. And we have sort of for peddler.
No, peddlers.
We actually have this.
It's a little hypocritical. You've got a sign in your, you don't even let them into your apartment.
Well, I can't say in these days anyone's trying to get into your apartment.
That's true.
But I should be so lucky that somebody would come by peddling something. I would probably buy it, whatever it was, unless it was a shallot, because those are problematic now. Yeah.
So, okay,
so I think that to make a sort of generic foreign accent and say in that context about the shilling of stuff in a crass way and differentiating what she does, I think is like really old-timey sort of mix of classism and racism. I don't think it's worthy. I don't think it is like this. I think it's more the sort of thing that points to bigger systems than the sort of thing that points to Alison Roman being like, a figure who we shall never hear from again because she's the worst person to ever lived.
Yeah. So my feeling about that moment in the interview is that it was crass. And it did invoke something, but I think what it invoked is xenophobic. And I think that this is something that's become kind of like a bugaboo for me because I see these two concepts being conflated a lot.
Xenophobia and racism, you mean?
Yes.
But then what about when you bring in Chrissy Teigen?
Well, hold on.
Definitely American. Okay.
So hold on. The idea that, you say please to, because this was the thing. It was like, please to, and you invoke the idea of, like you said, this sort of, supplicant, scammy peddler, who speaks English as a second language. And that's where, you're making fun of their syntax and suggesting that there's something kind of, grasping about it.
Right.
And that very much invokes this idea of like you said, like the peddler, the gypsy, this sort of other, but I don't really think it has anything to do with race.
But you don't, it has something to do with race.
I don't think so. And I think the thing is because we live in a moment where these are sort of slippery concepts that kind of get conflated a lot, and not least because Donald Trump is constantly saying things that are racist and xenophobic, or xenophobic in a way that bump up against things that are racist. At this point, I think a lot of people feel like it's a distinction without a difference, whether it's a foreigner that you're mocking or whether it's somebody's race. But I still think that it's important to I don't know. I don't think they're the same thing.
Okay, I agree. So they're different things.
Okay,
yes.
But then to move into the idea that it was race-based in any way, or like a punch down to
punch down. Okay, so I think, but just to stick with the first part, I think what it was that I think xenophobia, racism, classism, all different things, but that can be kind of intertwined. And I think the reason the narrative became about racism specifically is both because it's Twitter, and because of the fact that it was Marie Kondo and Chrissy Teigen mentioned kind of, at least the way the interview was edited, kind of in one breath. And I think had it just been Marie Kondo, it would have been a different and perhaps non-response.
I don't agree, but we'll never know what could or couldn't have been.
Well, in terms of why it became that in the cultural conversation. I don't mean what was going on in Alison Roman's mind, which is indeed
I think it really just has more to do with, it becomes much easier to villainize somebody, especially, in the environment in which this was happening, if you can slide it into a racist white woman narrative. Like, nothing
and then the
way.
Vietnam tour angle came in, which is that people on Twitter dug up, or I don't know how hard this was to dig up, that I don't know whether this ever took place or was planned to take place and didn't because of the pandemic. I couldn't figure this out. She was at least scheduled to give a tour of Vietnam.
Right, and people were going to be discovering it along with her. Like, she had never been. Right.
Oh, so I'm saying that this was something that people were sort of throwing at it. And that to me seems a little forced, because it seems sort of like, clearly she's a famous enough person. She's kind of, like, she's the draw, not because she's supposed to be an expert on Vietnam, but because she's a famous person. But that just seemed like once the narrative became about this, I guess it was because I was aware of the pre-existing kind of beef against her to do with the stew. It did seem like, and people have pointed this out who are not me also, that this was just kind of waiting to happen, that there were a lot of people who were angry at Alison Roman and at her success, very much in the way that people have been angry kind of at Lena Dunham for her success that feels to some undeserved. And this was just kind of the moment for it. And my theory, and what the point of my Art Digital Peach, whatever I'm talking about, was that the reason that this is the moment that this all sort of blew up is that Alison Roman has been very professionally lucky at this very terrible moment in history, because it just so happens that her recipes are very suited to quarantine grocery shopping. So she's being very celebrated and very much in the public eye at the moment. And I think anybody who wanted to kind of take her down is going to be very,
Yeah. I do think
moment.
I feel like I saw this mentioned, I guess maybe I thought it was by you, but it might have been by somebody else, that her fan base has and this is another difference between her and Chrissy Teigen that I want to kind of get into in a little bit. That her fan base has an interesting relationship with her in that, because she's seen as so much more accessible, her lifestyle is seen as more accessible, that there is more of this sort of why not me aspect to it, where they admire her, but they also resent her. And when there comes a moment that you could potentially, where the tide could turn against her, that people will eagerly jump on that bandwagon. That's sort of a unique thing to being a celebrity at this low level. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then I wanted to kind of segue into the idea that there was this abuse of power in what Alison Roman said, specifically about Chrissy Teigen, which, because Chrissy Teigen got on Twitter and started...
Oh no, her responses have been like a thing of literature.
Yeah.
It is worth reading those responses now that she's again unlocked her account.
It's phenomenal. Yeah. So she gets on Twitter and she starts talking about how, this was so hurtful and, wounding to read these comments, and that how, she's worked so hard on this, it's not a content farm, it's just her like working so hard at something that's not profitable, to a point that felt truly a little bit disingenuous, considering that, she's writing all of this, sitting on like $12 million in a mansion. I mean, she's 99th percentile successful. And I don't know, it's like when you talk about the power differential here, Chrissy Teigen is more famous, more influential, more beautiful, vastly wealthier, and even had specific power over Alison Roman
as an executive producer
for show. The idea that you could look at this and that there's any question as to who between the two of them like was in a position of power is just so bonkers.
Yes.
You know,
Well, it reminds me of like, so each of them kind of remind me of different other famous people who've come up in other such things. So Alison Roman really seems like in the Lena Dunham role, but I feel like Chrissy Teigen's kind of in like the Beyonce role, where it's like the fandom is like, it's fandom of a particular famous person, but it's also fandom and their work, but it's also fandom that has kind of a political angle for some of the fans, where the famous person also represents struggles that maybe that specific famous person isn't particularly struggling with at that particular moment. But, so like, I don't remember, there was some controversy, like this was ages ago, where Beyonce possibly, was it that she like posed in some like sensuous photo while pregnant or something?
Yes.
And people responded kind of negatively, and it was like, and that was by some interpreted as like negative about Black motherhood, something like this, where the underlying issues are real things, whether the very famous, very rich person at the center of it is really like the person who most represents it is something else. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but these dynamics.
Well, this came into that thread that we were talking about. You know, it was like the buckle up white women, like, you know, you're all complicit in this beef. You thought it was just about these two people, but no, it's really about you and how racist you are. And she said that, you know, that Chrissy Teigen had to like, I don't know what she said, like run naked backward through a cornfield on her hands in high heels or something, just to achieve like a scrap of what's been handed to white women. And I think, you know, it's insane to see someone assert this about somebody who, again, is like a multiple millionaire who was one of the top paid models in the world. Like, I mean,
models, I think, can we just like pause on the model aspect a little bit? 'Cause like, I feel like the whole beauty angle is very relevant.
It's massive.
Like most people are not paid anything for their looks, let alone a ton.
Yeah, so, let alone millions of dollars.
Yeah. It's a little, her physicality is complicated in that respect, because obviously, because like I think, if you're saying that Alison Roman has benefited, and I maintain that she has, from her looks, I think not quite to the same extent.
Yeah,
that a supermodel
not to the same extent as Chrissy Teigen.
No.
And I mean, I don't know, the thing that I keep coming back to is this idea that like, despite all of this, despite, you know, her massive, massive success, that Chrissy Teigen always is going to be like at a disadvantage. She's always going to be a victim because she has somewhat darker skin. There's something so condescending, and I guess like kind of racist about this framework. You know, you insist that like this is still the defining thing about you, that, you know, that you're not white and therefore you're always going to be part of an oppressed class. And that, you know, in a way that even being successful, you know, successful beyond anybody else's wildest dreams cannot make up for.
Well, I think what's happened, and this is again like kind of where I landed with the piece, is that basically I think there are underlying issues in kind of the food world and just in the culture in general that end up kind of like getting very personified, and it becomes like about the characters instead of about the issues. And I feel like what happened in a case like this is that I think the resentment about Alison Roman becoming successful on the basis of, frankly, not very, I'm sorry, like I don't find her recipes very exciting. I feel like the criticism of Lena Dunham, where it's like anybody could have done that and she got money, I don't think is totally fair. But I think in Alison Roman's case, it's a little bit more fair, although I think she's also, I'm sure, very hardworking, and I'm sure cooks better than I do. You know what I mean? But I think, but it's not that she personally did something wrong. It's not that Alison Roman went out and did something wrong by stir frying chickpeas in coconut milk. You know what I mean? But then it's like, it's hard to describe these things kind of in a way that isn't about individuals, and as if like the problem. Yeah. So I think that's kind of where I ended up landing on this, that like there is an unfairness in who gets to be famous for a chickpea recipe, but it's not, but that then it just seems like it becomes this stupid culture war over like who's allowed to make chickpeas, which is just dumb. And like, I want to say that's not what anybody's saying, but it absolutely is what people are saying, which gets us to this article about this that's been making the rounds by Roxana Hadidi on Hajiba, that it's called Alison Roman, the colonization. Is it okay if we jump to this? Because it's like amazing.
Yeah, let's get to this.
Okay, Alison Roman, the colonization of spices and the exhausting prevalence of ethnic erasure in popular food culture. That's the title. In full. Yeah. So, wait. Sorry, I'm not finding this thing. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is just a quote from the article. I understand that people get irritated when they feel like they have to read an essay before diving into the recipe, and I can already hear the grumblings. Do I really need to know about North African culture before using harissa? Yeah, dude, maybe you should. Your lack of an attention span should not excuse cultural erasure. Now, okay.
The idea that we're all committing cultural erasure in our kitchens when we reach for a spice without properly considering its like historical context from which anybody cooking now is removed by literally thousands of years. Like,
well, so that's the thing is like, I want to say nobody's making that argument, but people are unfortunately making that incredibly stupid argument. And it's like,
I mean, this article literally makes that argument after saying that nobody's making this argument that I will proceed to make in an extremely confrontational and hostile way. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've read so many pieces like this. They are such a genre. And the thing that I keep seizing on in them is that they always come back to this like personal resentment. It's the why not me thing, but it's also I'm just gonna read this. I'm gonna read this out loud. Okay, so this is a memory of the author's childhood. I would take Iranian bread to school every so often as part of my lunch, and other kids would make fun of me for not eating, quote, normal white bread. Did some of those little jerks grow up to make the stew? Maybe. This is like, there is an anecdote like this in every single
so I'm more sympathetic to these anecdotes. What I'm not sympathetic to is the notion that the answer to, see, I think it's a legitimate.
Well, hold on. Let me just get to the end of my thought.
Okay.
There's one of these anecdotes in every single one of these pieces about, who should or shouldn't cook using which and whatever, ethnic influences, spices, this and that. And I was bullied as a kid, not for eating the wrong kind of bread, but for wearing the wrong clothes or whatever. Like, it sucks to be bullied for who you are. It sucks to be bullied generally. I'm sure it especially sucks if you already feel like an outsider, like, you're outnumbered by your white classmates and some of them are making fun of your family's food. I'm sure it's really, really shitty. But the idea that like, you're going to hang on to this and you're going to resurrect it, and it's an appropriate grudge to kind of utilize as the foundation for how you approach people who are now adults, who are now cooking food. Like, I don't know, the resentment, the idea that it's hypocritical for somebody to have made fun of your lunch as a child, and now 30 years later, they're eating that kind of food. I mean, let's maybe let that go. Tiny bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the resentment, but I think the problem is I just keep coming back to the like personalizing of it, where it's like, I think, and I'm going to just, again, like be all social justice warrior about it. I think it's true that stir-fried chickpeas or whatever slightly curried chickpeas coming from not just a white woman, but a white woman who comes across as sort of cool and a very particular and kind of aspirational Brooklyn type class, of the sort who would be profiled on Into the Gloss or something like this. In fact, as I said, she was. I think that relates to race and explains why the stew went viral and why other chickpea recipes do not. And I certainly do not think it is what the meal in question tastes like. Again, having made it a couple times and found it not that exciting. Now, that said, I think the problem is like and this just comes back to just with cultural appropriation discussions in general, they always fall apart in the same exact, very predictable way, where instead of I think I almost wish it were more about the childhood and the resentments and the upset and less, and then just didn't do that extra step of saying, and this is why these people can eat chickpeas and these cannot. You know what I mean? Like that's where for me, it falls apart. I think I want to hear about why different people are upset about different things. I don't want it to be then this new and complicated and absurd and unfollowable etiquette that doesn't make any sense and doesn't, I mean, people are going to eat food and just to jump to a slightly related but slightly different part of it, this notion that it's not just food writers who need to be attuned to these things, but individuals cooking is just so, it's that's where it just gets to this level of absurdity that's how could you even control? It's thought policing to such a ridiculous level. People are cooking. How would you know?
Yeah. I mean, the invocation of, historic conflicts, colonialism, and this is the case for this Fajiva article, but also just comes up constantly, this idea that the only reason white people even have spices is because many hundreds or thousands of years ago, somebody did something bad, somebody stole them from, and brought them back. I don't know. It's just, it's such a flattening of, and it's such an ahistorical understanding of how how it travels, how it bleeds, how it rubs off from one society to another.
Well, it's flattening also in terms of just projecting a very US centric, very this moment centric idea of race. Not to return again to Isaac Mizrahi, fashion designer and possible sellout. Do we think that his Syrian Jewish ancestors were or were not using spices? And and if he's white, well, were they using spices because of what? Perhaps they were in Syria where there were a lot of spices.
I mean, the US centricness of it is also interesting in that you're taking this, very global economy, very post-internet understanding of, it's these are things that made it possible for culture to just kind of blow all over the world. To the point where now if you go to a major city in another country, they all kind of feel sort of the same, in certain ways. You'll see the same.
Not that we know anymore, but yeah.
Just true. It's been a while since I was abroad, but I don't know. I mean, I was struck the last time I was in France that the brand where you could get your croissants that were supposed to be the best in the city is the same one that you have on Fifth Avenue in New York City. And there's something interesting about that.
Is it La Durée or
Eric Kaiser?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sort of losing my thread here.
Now I just want a croissant.
Oh God, me too. I made scones this morning, despite not having a single drop of English blood in my body. But, right? Rude. But yeah, the sort of sophistication of people's palates, what people are willing to eat, how experimental they're willing to be. These are all products. Something even Alison Roman's chickpea stew would have been, even 30 years ago, it would have been considered a little off the wall, a little weird. As compared with what international cooking was in the 80s. it was not the kind of palate that we're used to, the aggressiveness of the spice or,
who are we? My family was definitely cooking probably just chicken liver. I don't know. Wait, 30 years ago? No, it wouldn't have. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, 30 years ago. I mean, 30 years ago was like the mid 80s. And I mean, in terms of like, I guess it would have been more likely that an Indian family would be cooking an Indian dish and a not Indian family would have not been, I guess. And that's some dish that takes inspiration, as the New York Times description says of this, from Jamaican cuisine, also Indian cuisine, and so forth. Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't have been as likely. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is I've been cooking from this. I have like a 1980s edition of the New York Times International Cookbook, which I cracked open thinking that it was going to be, like New York Times recipes now. And the stuff in there is so bland. And it was surprising until I realized that at the time that this was published, people were a lot closer in terms of what was considered normal and palatable to like 1960s canned ham party platters with like olives stuck all over the ham, stuck on top of pineapple slices, those crazy. Well, I guess white people were, or some white people. Well, in mainstream American culture, which of course at the time was white. Yeah. But yeah, the idea that like it was considered very like daring to put anchovies in your potato salad. And, obviously we're well past that at this point, but this conversation about food culture, especially when people start invoking like, the historic path of spices around the world and, and how global cuisine sort of came to be a thing. It skips that. Yeah. It flattens everything. Yeah. And it's like, you're just applying this very, very present day, not just, within the past 5 years, sort of lens to things in a way that just misses, virtually all of the nuance. Well, the happy ending to this is that they've made up, at least. Chrissy Teigen and Alison Roman have made up. Yeah. Marie Kondo has not been heard from, I think, in any of this because she is, frankly, above it all. Yeah, I'm sure that she decided that in getting involved in this conversation would not spark joy, and more power to her. Yes. But while can we jump to the other kitchen topic? Yeah, we're all about cooking in kitchens today. I don't know. I'm spending a lot of time in mine. I'm even in mine right now. And this was, website Curbed. Yes. And it was by, I think, the same person who wrote, was it Sarah Miller who also wrote the thing about Karens in the Times? Yes, I think so. That we didn't like, but this we do like. This is the Curbed thing about Nancy Meyers' kitchen. Well, I was really mainly interested in the kitchen itself. Not so much. Talking about the Nancy Meyers kitchen. I was trying to think if I've seen any Nancy Meyers movies in which the kitchen figures prominently. I don't know that I've seen any Nancy Meyers movies at all. But I've heard of her kitchens. I've heard of this. The Nancy Meyers movie kitchen is something I knew about from which is the culture. 2 islands, lots of marble, like a pot filler, right? These like aspirational. Mm-hmm. It looks like something that would be in a model home, in a staged home, or in my initial impression was like in a store that sells kitchen remodeling, like it didn't look like a kitchen that actual people actually use at all, or it had no sort of personalized quality and very, very little food visible. Yeah. Only an artfully arranged bowl of lemons. That's all you get. Yeah. And it's this huge kitchen and it's like made for cooking, but also like there's no food. And yeah, it's weird. I don't know. It's big. I'm envious of the amount of space. But yeah, I don't know. The article is kind of like about, like what it all means, a kitchen like that, whether it's desirable or sort of corrupt in its offensive even. And this was an interesting, maybe what was good about this piece as compared with the sort of first person about Karen's piece that we didn't like by this same writer is that it really takes the form of sort of a series of conversations with two people, one of whom has a Nancy Meyers kitchen, but for whom the kitchen has become sort of like the embodiment of everything that's gone wrong in her life. You know, she has the kitchen, but she doesn't have her husband anymore. You know, she's cooking for one in there, which does sound terrible to me. Yeah. And there's, you know, the other woman who doesn't have a Nancy Meyers kitchen, but is sort of affronted by everything that they stand for. And there's this conflict happening between them, but they're not talking to each other. The writer is a conduit, texting both of them. It's an interesting piece.
Yeah, it is. It is. And yet a not very interesting kitchen, I would say. No. I mean, so my dream kitchens are ones I've seen on Poodle Instagram in Japan and in Scandinavia. These are the sort of hubs of apparently amazing kitchens. And there's often like a poodle and then like this minimalist space. And I know that I would not actually be able to keep a minimalist kitchen myself, but it looks nice in a picture.
It certainly does. Which is what, you know, has that in common with a Nancy Meyers kitchen.
Well, they're sometimes like really like some of the kitchens I'm thinking of, they're like tiny, but I really like these stainless steel countertops. I find that kind of interesting looking.
God, but those would just destroy your knives, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But it's aesthetically, I think there's a disagreement here over the countertops.
Winston says he loves a stainless steel countertop. He loves the Nancy Meyers kitchen.
What does he think about the stew? Probably not much, I would think. It doesn't seem like, at least I don't remember Bizou being very interested in it.
Did you feed it to her?
Well, I mean, so everything we eat makes its way from a high chair to the floor. Oh, more or less. So I'm sure she did eat some of it. It's just not her style. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, we stress out a lot. Some members of the household more than others over which foods are okay for people to eat but poisonous to the dog. There's a whole list. You know,
yes, I have
onions.
If you
grapes.
Yes. Well, so onions.
Raw.
It's not necessarily. Yeah, they shouldn't eat that. No.
But yeah, I was just thinking about the stew, you know, having heard from you that it was not, in fact, as terrific as everybody else said it was. I'm glad that I didn't try to make it myself, even though I bought chickpeas the other day thinking like, well, maybe, you know, everyone else is doing it. Maybe I should too. And now I'm glad because I would have had to feed it to the dog. It might contain things that he can't actually eat. Not a waste.
I don't know. Well, also, have you considered your dog's ancestry when contemplating whether it would be okay to eat which dish?
Is an excellent question.
Should we do our rants though? Because I feel like we have some rants and we've been talking for...
Yeah, we've been talking for about an hour. Okay, so just to cap things off, I guess, rants, I'm irritable in lockdown. I want out of my house. And in the meantime, everything is making me upset. So I'm going to rant about the Ms. Monopoly advertisement, which everyone is dunking on, very rightfully so.
Rightfully so, indeed.
If you haven't seen it, it starts out as this sort of like, it's almost like a short film with these teenage girls, talking about how they're going to change the world by being involved in science and technology and invention and this and that. And then you're like, what is this selling me? And it turns out that what it's selling you is a board game. And it's just like transparent, grasping woke capitalism. This attempt to kind of, like poke you right in the feminist part of your brain and
a girl boss.
Yes. Spur you to buy this thing, which I think also contains, is there other rules that like the female players start with more
Ms.
money?
Monopoly is what it's called.
Yeah, Ms. Monopoly. Mm-hmm. But the thing that drove me crazy about this commercial, apart from what drove everyone crazy about it, is that you have these girls who were born in like 2005 saying, well, women, you know, used to just be in the kitchen and they just had to look pretty, but now, and it's like, there have been like 150 years of hardcore feminist history between.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure that both of us had jobs prior to the birth of.
It's true.
These, anyway, yeah.
Only amid quarantine have I been able to look pretty in a kitchen with poison ivy all over my face.
The best way to.
Yeah, it's like, you know, slow your roll, Ms. Monopoly. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. do not ignore the actual history of feminism in your attempt to sell me a board game. And that's my rant.
I agree with it. I endorse this rant.
Thank you.
And I'm going to do a rant too. And it's not so much a rant because, as we were discussing earlier, these things, it's funny and bad in a way. So I am an avid listener to, and have also been quoted on, although never appeared on, hint, hint, the Savage Lovecast. My tweets have been quoted on it. So anyway, Dan Savage he's a sex and relationship advice columnist and podcaster. He gets a lot of calls, and he always does, from these men who their wives have given birth a few weeks ago, a few months ago, not that long ago.
A few minutes ago.
Well, I don't think it's ever been a few minutes, actually, although now I want to like go through the archives and find if that ever was. And they call Dan Savage to complain that their wives are not available to them in all ways, and are wondering whether maybe they should ask their wife, who was like lying there like a postpartum nursing, like can't move, whatever, for an open relationship. Because, you know, like, and they go to Dan Savage because he says that because he is in favor of ethical non-monogamy, of open relationships, and he has told people who are in sort of in sexless marriages, like, do what you need to do to stay married and stay sane. That's his refrain about this. Mm-hmm. These men expect that Dan Savage is going to be like, you need sex. It's an important need that our puritanical society is ignoring. You go while you're, you know, like, ignore the baby. You don't have to deal with that. You have your needs, go. And he doesn't say that, to his full credit. He's always, Dan Savage is like, do you know what childbirth is? And Dan Savage, openly gay man, which a fact about him that anybody calling his show is going to know, has to like basically sort of metaphorically sit these straight men down and explain to them, like, when a woman gives birth, a baby comes out of her body in the part in question, most of the time. And if not, there's been surgery, which is its own thing. This is just like not about to happen. And that, like, this is not the moment when you both in a couple are going to have major responsibilities for caring for this child to like go cavorting, you know. And these men fascinate me, like, that there's this infinite supply of them. It's always like some variant of the exact same call. And it's like, I'm sure they are frustrated. They also just don't seem to ever think like beyond the immediate moment where like,
apparently they don't listen to the show that they're calling into. No, because I think this is fascinating.
Well, the generous interpretation I have is just that they are very frustrated and aren't really thinking straight, so to speak. They aren't like thinking about the fact that if they ask the woman who has just given birth to their child for an open relationship at that moment, they just do not have that woman and possibly that child in their lives anymore, because it's like not.
It's like, you'll get an open relationship. Yeah, exactly. You'll get to sleep with other people.
Exactly. And they're just like not thinking this through, and they just conflate it. I guess the part of it that annoys me is that they're conflating it with that women just, you know, they're not into sex as much as men, you know, because like right after a child comes out, they're like not ready for. You know, it's just because women are, you know, like don't have dirty minds the way men do. And, you know. Right.
That's the issue. It's not the massive actual physical trauma to.
Right. So that's the thing. Yeah. So that's the thing that just, and it's just so funny because like these men surely know how babies are made. And yet
they were supposedly in the room when the baby emerged.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I find these men pathetic and kind of fascinating that they always call this question. They're always presumably surprised. I mean, I don't know how often he actually speaks to the man when it's this type of question, because sometimes he calls back the caller and other times he just sort of like answers them, but just on the podcast. It's just like, yeah, it's always the same thing. He always is like, you know, do what you want, like once the child's like a bit older, but like do not expect this of a woman who has just given birth. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So my rant is that while I do not, as I have stated on many occasions, want to ban men, this particular subset of men, ban them. Ban them. Throw them out. Throw out the whole ban in a box that used to store that used to store Ms. Monopoly, but only after sanitizing the box or letting it sit for 48 hours.
Right. Cannot forget your safety etiquette even at a time like this.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Phoebe. This has been Feminine Chaos on Blogging Heads. It has. If you enjoyed this and you want more, you can always support us on Patreon, I think. Patreon. I have a rash. It's in my brain. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And until next time.